So it's the Thursday the 22nd, and it appears that the big story today is the fallout from mobilization. Let me show you what I mean. Here, we're going to go back one day in the ISW, the Institute for Study of War. Russian President Putin announcement of partial mobilization on September 21st reflected many problems Russia faces in its faltering invasion of Ukraine. And I think that was a theme that I spent my time covering yesterday as I talked about the three weird ways that Russia exposed its own weakness. That's really what was going on. Partial mobilization is an admission of weakness. Let's look at today with the ISW. The Kremlin's heavy handed approach to partial mobilization may successfully meet the Kremlin's internal quota of mobilized personnel, but it is unlikely to generate effective soldiers, and it's prompting significant domestic backlash. That's right, and that's the big story today. The Kremlin's openly not adhering to its promised conditions for partial mobilization just 24 hours after its declaration that it's only going to impact 300,000 men. Kremlin quotas will likely force local officials to mobilize men regardless of their military status, and that's the first broken promise. The Kremlin will also likely mobilize ethnically non-Russian and immigrant communities at a disproportionate rate. And my prediction is once the four areas in the Donbass and otherwise, Kherson and Zaporizhia, are Russian, that they will declare full mobilization in those regions. A village in the Republic of Buryata noted that enlistment officers mobilized 700 out of their total population of 5,500. In another place, Russian officials mobilized about 25% of the male population in a single village in another ethnically non-Russian region. The Kremlin's heavy-handed approach to mobilization is prompting public anger and distrust. So while the Russians had like an 80% pro fight in Ukraine kind of thing in the polls, I talked about this in another episode where I was talking about why do the Russians still support it? Well, part of it was that they're getting Russian propaganda, and part of it is it's not really touching them. So if it's not really affecting them, sure, yeah, go ahead, let's support it, do what you need to do, cleanse the land of those Nazis, because that's what you're hearing, right? Okay, here's the British Ministry of Defense. On September 21st, Russia's Putin announced partial mobilization. Russia's likely to struggle with the logistical and administrative challenges of mustering 300,000 personnel, and it's unlikely to be combat effective for months. Okay, so it's not a quick fix. Likely to be highly unpopular with parts of the Russian population. That's true, and that's happening, and I'll show you. Putin is accepting considerable political risk, where the special military operation wasn't much of a risk. He could take the volunteer force and do what it was going to do, and it wasn't really going to move the needle a lot with most of the population. The move is effectively an admission that Russia has exhausted its supply of willing volunteers, and that's what I was talking about when I was saying in that video. It's one of the weird ways that Russia exposed its own weaknesses. Okay, let's go on. This is an article about mobilization. School teachers are pressed into handing out draft notices. Men given an hour to pack their things and appear at draft centers. Women sobbing as they sent their husbands and sons off to fight in Russia's war in Ukraine. First day of Russia's full mobilization since the Second World War produced an emotional showdowns, even signs of protest, which is pretty significant in Russia. Podveska, or draft papers, that's the name for draft papers. One woman said a 52-year-old relative had been delivered draft papers before the president announced the draft the previous day. Okay, so there's going to be a backlash. Here's Radio Free Europe. This is no game changer. Russian mobilization may slow, but not stop Ukrainian offensive. So I don't know that it'll even slow it. Except for months out, like nothing's going to happen in the near term. It'll all be what'll happen around Christmas and maybe into the new year. The Kremlin's aim to mobilize 300,000 men. Vladimir Putin announced partial mobilization may extend the Russian ability to sort of sustain this war, but does not change the overall trajectory and outcome, said Michael Kaufman, a military analyst at a U.S. think tank. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's going to have an effect. 300, like, I hear comments, people will say, well, yeah, it's not going to do anything. 300,000 men is nothing to sneeze at. But how well trained are they? How motivated are they? That's really the question. So the numbers can still affect you, even if the quality of the men is bad. So it's going to create a huge loss as the numbers tick up. It's going to impact Putin politically. Let's hope that we can get this done before that. Here's the backlash. More than 1,300 detained in Russia after Putin's partial military mobilization sparks protest. Remember, you can go to jail for many years for protesting against the war. So this is a serious thing. 1,300 people, demonstrations held in 38 cities. Here's another article. Russia arrests over 1,300. 1,307 people were detained in 39 cities across Russia. Now, here's what's really interesting. Prices of one-way flights out of Russia surged after Putin's announcement, and images on social media appear to show long queues at the border. So the people who are largely supportive of the war are now going, now that it affects me, I'm not sure that I want to have a part of this. France 24, Zelensky's throwing fuel on the fires. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Thursday called Russians to protest the partial mobilization announced by President Putin. Now, he didn't need to. It's a smart political move for him to do that, but like they were doing this on their own because they're seeing it start to affect them. And he said this: 55,000 Russian soldiers died in these 6 months of war. Do you want more? No. Then protest. Fight back, run away, surrender to the Ukrainian army, Zelensky said in his daily address. 55,000 Russian soldiers died? No, no, no. That's not true. Their media was telling them yesterday that the Russian army has lost only 5,937 servicemen. Now, that's a laughable like 23 a day or something like that. Now, I did the math. Here, if you go and you look at how many dead Russians, I did the math yesterday. I even put it into a spreadsheet to look at, what the American said, X number, and the multiple for wounded, and that's what it amounts to after this many days of war. And here's the UK, and here's the Russian, and here's the Ukrainian figure. So if you want to see how many dead Russians there actually are, you can decide for yourself. But yeah, look at that. Now, here's one of the real differences. It's not just the numbers. It's not the quantity of soldiers that are in here. 300,000 is nothing to sneeze at, but it's the quality. And the quality is based on motivation. You're defending your homeland. That's one. Then you're seeing these evidence of abductions, torture, forced deportation from your homeland. You have a real will to fight where they're going, why am I here? Especially those that are being essentially hijacked to go to war that you didn't want to volunteer for to begin with. Every populated area in Ukraine which has been liberated after Russian occupation has tales to tell of brutality, torture, and disappearances. Every populated area in Ukraine. Like that's significant. And as they liberate more territory, they're going to find that they're going to see more and more war crimes. I'm going to show you the title. It's a Kharkiv Human Rights Protection Group. First evidence of Russian abductions. Just Google that and you can see it. I don't even want to read this, and I've read some horrid stuff, but I'm not going to read this on this video. Okay, but that's why they're motivated. Ukrainian military claims to advance in eastern Luhansk region. Ukrainian military said it's smoothly but confidently gaining ground. Let's look at the map. So here's the map. This is the 18th, and watch as it changes. Now here's Severodonetsk that they lost a month and a half, 2 months ago, something like that, and they're just moving that direction. Keep watching. Here's what's going on. Look at the map change. It's just folding in on itself, right? So they're making progress. It's a lot slower progress now, but they're still making eastern progress. So here's the actual executive order on partial Russian mobilization. It's not all that long, but it's saying what Putin was saying. If you want to see his speech, you can see little clips of his speech here. This is without commentary, and you can also see it with my commentary if you want to see that as well.
Now it's time for fun with Russian state media.
He can't seem to recognize that there might have been something else going on beyond the Donbass from 2014 forward, like that Russia invaded. Lavrov noted that one's trying to make Russia the aggressor while turning a blind eye to how Kyiv was killing people in Donbass. Let's say that was even the case, that it was just, that the Kiev government was actually doing war crimes, let's say, it's kind of overshadowed by the active atrocities of, destroying shopping malls with civilian populations and things along those lines. But let's say Lavrov criticized the activities of the International Criminal Court that tried to accuse the Russian military of committing war crimes. Okay. At the same time, neither the coup in Ukraine nor events in Odessa on May 2, 2014, nor the shelling of peaceful cities in Donbass or many other events did not become a reason for a clear reaction from ICC. Okay, one, it was internal. It was not necessarily the war crimes that you're painting it to be. It was actually trying to deal with militants that were there. But let's set all that aside. You're actively committing war crimes. And so they're concerned with that. Like, let's deal with the active commission of war crimes. The provocation in Bucha, Sergei Lavrov noted that Western countries were unwilling to press the Ukrainian authorities to publish the names of the people. What? So he's still holding to the fiction that Bucha wasn't a thing, that it was kind of made up. And all the Western press was there. Free press was actually confirming this from multiple angles. The Russian foreign minister noted that all those responsible for the shelling of civilians would be held accountable, regardless of their citizenship. Well, I like to hear that, because that would mean that the Russians are going to be held accountable for destroying the lives of numerous innocent civilians in Ukraine. The pinnacle was Mr. Zelensky's interview from August 5 last year, when he advised everyone who feels Russian to move to Russia for the benefit of their children and grandchildren. So this was a speech a year ago, not this August, but a year ago. It seems to me that the decision of the residents of a number of Ukrainian citizens have made about the referendums is a response to his suggestion. No, the citizens are not behind this. It's the occupying force behind this. The percentage of citizens that are pro-Russian right now is at an all-time low, and it's reflected in political polls. Ukraine has turned into a totalitarian state was the last of his of his talking points, which was so amazingly, absurdly, like, surreal that he said this when there's a totalitarian regime trying to force a fake referendum. And I mean, it's bizarre. Now, there was this great comment by the UN ambassador. I'm going to play it.
I also noted today that Russian diplomats flee almost as aptly as Russian soldiers.
Russian diplomats, after Lavrov walked out, he said, I noted that Russian diplomats flee almost as quickly as Russian soldiers. Great line. Okay, finally, Dmitry Medvedev is still saber-rattling. Our hypersonic weapons can reach both the US and Europe before you can even do anything about it. And referendums will be held, and Donbass republics and other territories will be accepted into Russia. That's really interesting. It's not referendums will be held, and we will allow the people in the Donbass Republic to choose whether they will join us or not. It is a foregone conclusion that this is going to happen, because it's going to be a sham election, and everybody knows it. Even the Russians know it. Russia announced that it's not only mobilization capabilities, but also any Russian weapons, including strategic nuclear weapons that are now in the mix. The Western establishment, in general, all citizens of NATO countries need to understand that Russia has chosen its own path, and there's no turning back. And that might be the truest thing that he said. Russia did choose its own path. There's no turning back. But Zelensky also said it'll be settled on the battlefield, and that's the way it's going to go. Okay, finally, last thing that I want to point out is that we're going to be meeting today. Oops, let me remove my notifications. Please contact with me, by the way. Feel free to ask me questions. Like, this person asked me about, where is that? About Lavrov, right? So go through Lavrov's speech in the UN, please. So many Russians and Serbians think he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Yeah, they really do. I'm not sure if I'm going to go over Lavrov's speech, but please give me those kinds of suggestions. What I wanted to show you here was that we're going to have a live stream at 1 o'clock today, Friday, 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. You're going to have to translate the time if you don't live on the East Coast in the United States, as I do. But if you can join us, please join us. Thank you for the time. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.